How do you define God?
Well, by recognizing at the essence the abomination in the concept. So the idea of God is an abomination. To have belief in a God is an abomination. The synagogue is an abomination. The temple and the church and the cathedral is an abomination. It's a desecration, and that's all that the scriptures have helped to do. I think that it's absurd that we still care.
So I'm wondering, what do you turn to say, this is the rock? This is the one thing I know for sure.
The atom seed of self. I am the same as my God. There is no God out there. I am the enactment, the embodiment, the manifestation of the living principle of prior unity.
In this world, we have a hard time hearing the values of others. We have a hard time being in the room, in the same room, with people of different values. I understand maybe walking out of a church if they don't share the same values. But in 2014, Natalie Grant, who I like very much, walked out of the Grammys because of the occult kind of dark, show that was going on. I don't know that I would have done that. I mean, I understand why she did it if she didn't like it. It's kind of like at a party, you walk out if you don't like what's going on. But on stage, there's so many opportunities to make a good joke about that. I could have thought in sitting there watching that, so many jokes could have come up that you could have gone and represented. In this video, I don't think I represent. It's not kind of what we do here on this podcast. I'd rather just let the person speak. If a person brings up the topic over and over, like Sacha kept bringing up God numerous times, and I kept trying to move on to other subjects. I want to talk about UFOs and interesting stuff like that. But he kept bringing it up, so I said, okay, so what's your definition of God? And we went there. I got an understanding of it, and it better tells the story to me. Doesn't mean I agree, but I definitely like to have the conversation, and I think as a society we should be open to hearing other people's values, even if they are diametrically opposed to our own. This is a new concept for this generation at this time period in history, and I want to see how far you can make it through without leaving something in the comments negative. Sacha, welcome back. How was your visit with the Hopi elders?
It was very, very meaningful, and I'm sort of midpoint through this US tour right now, but that was definitely left an indelible mark at the front end of this tour. Thank you.
I bet. That's neat. This is the first time we've had a repeat guest, so I'm very excited because we can go into all sorts of different areas, and I'm kind of curious your thoughts on a lot of different things, like maybe first, and then you guys can ask whatever you want, but I'm wondering what you know about Tesla, Nikola Tesla, and his work. I've seen some of your videos, is fascinated with it, but maybe what do you know about him as a person? Anything?
A great deal, and I could fire off in actually three different directions with three different narratives connected to the Tesla phenomenon. In the first instance, and for me the most important aspect of the Tesla phenomenon is that he represents archetypally the last of the grand Tatarians, the great Tatarians. So you talk about the takedown of the noble Romanov dynasty, the Russian noble dynasty, and that entire travesty that occurred. We discussed it briefly in the last talk with the Soviet Union and communist Russia and all of that, being the devise of the British Crown, the Vatican, and Wall Street, paid for by the good taxpayers of Middle America 100 years ago, or over 100 years ago. But that takedown,
Still paying for it.
yes, indeed. The takedown of ancient Tataria is exemplified archetypally by the genius of Nikola Tesla. It's almost as though the brilliance of the golden age of the ancient Tataria reincarnated in that man's genius in his time. And he then died ignominious and broke in a hotel, having been stymied by Edison and Morgan and these other midnight Masons. who flushed his genius out of the marketplace during his life. It was an absolute travesty, but nonetheless, he seeded cold electricity, basically, in simple terms. What we do now with torsion physics and scalar and all the rest of it, we have Tesla to thank for so much in terms of just being the vanguard, the icebreaker, leading the way. So there's that piece that is interesting to talk about. The other piece that's interesting to talk about is the connection between Donald Trump and his uncle, who inherited or acquired the Tesla papers. This was well known. So the Trump family have contained the Tesla legacy, certainly for the duration of Donald J. Trump's life. There's a very interesting connection there, and it's unlikely anyone's going to really hack into how enigmatic and esoteric that particular subject is. But believe me, it's curious. And baseline is that Nikola Tesla represents his life and times and genius, represents the departure from the fallen light of Atlantis, so to speak, into the feminized dimension of hyperdimensional energy transmission, reception, and relay. So in a sense, Tesla is the guy who came along and squared the circle, circled the square. And that's saying something. After thousands of years of patrimonial, patriarchal, draconian, empirical dominion, you've got to factor it this way, that for so long, our world and all of our cultures and civilizations were predicated on conquest and dominion and of exploitation, of control, of again, this patriarchal device of plundering the earth's resources, bringing them to the surface, oil and gas and all of the resources of the earth, and combustion, blowing them up, and then harnessing hot electricity, the whole AC/DC, JP Morgan, Rothschild hegemony over humanity through wage slavery pegged to the need to pay for energy, which in and of itself was highly destructive energy. Hot electricity kills. Cold electricity doesn't. Cold electricity can transmit and heal the world, like the Nubian pyramids, like so many of the ancient arcane technologies, which were millennia ago, literally powering up this earth plane on free energy technology and healing technologies. Again, the feminized aspect of energy, reception, transmission, and rollout. So the life and times of Nikola Tesla was a perennial reminder of where we must take science. Essentially.
So if I may, I'm going to break down cold electricity. There may be some people that aren't familiar with it. I have worked with it hands-on, and first 14 years ago at a conference I presented before I knew Greg. And this gentleman came and he had found a diary of lots of Tesla's patents and instructions how to make it. So he got some funding from NASA to reproduce all of these inventions of his, some very bizarre. He had like 800 to 1,000 different patents. One of the main components, John, I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, of his, the most basic apparatus you can see is you take two capacitors. I think they were from an airplane. They're kind of cylindrical. Put them on these poles, and then there's an arc at the top and there's an arc at the bottom. And if the bottom one is shorted, it's going to allow hot electricity, and maybe I have it backwards, hot electricity to pass, which is the typical electricity you see, which will burn you if you touch it, strike you dead if it's high enough voltage and amps. But then if he either he disconnects or he lets the other circuit pass in the middle, and the flame turns from red to blue, and you can touch it, and you can touch all electric components of it. And at that point, you could hook one wire of it to a light bulb, stretch it all the way across the conference room, and it lit up a 100-watt light bulb, brighter than a regular electricity, and the wire was like as thin as a hair. Yeah. It was amazing. It would regular electricity would vaporize that wire. So it's something with the skin effect that he's inducing, where it's going outside the wire, doesn't heat it up, it's not hot. So that's kind of what he was speaking of. And Tesla
Oh,
said
wow.
this electricity has healing properties, where the hot electricity has
Yes, he
damaging
talked about that a lot.
properties. What's
That's
that?
right.
Tesla talked about that quite a bit, the healing properties of cold electricity.
So I did want to
Before
sum
we
up
go on,
that. Yeah.
I wonder what your definition of cold electricity versus hot electricity, or either one of you.
So, well, I spoke about it as the feminine aspect of the reality matrix. So when we're tapping into the centripetal spin and motion of things, we're changing the foundational dynamic of the false light matrix into an affirmative recursive motion toward the resurrection of the angelic template, which self-exists, self-reveals, self-fulfills behind the 3D temporal false light matrix. So we're living in a false light matrix, which is entropic, which is why disease and death and decay prevail. But in real terms, behind the so-called leptons and quarks and atoms and cells and molecules that composite so-called reality, behind that 3D entropic reality complex exists the template of prior unity. And it's a return, a recursive motion toward that. So Tesla's craft, his art, his science, his superluminal genius was all about a return to serendipity, a return to the angelic template by healing, affirming, resurrection of the immortal and immanent paradigm, which again is what exists behind the entropic one. I mean, this this Vajra Dorj, which I don't go anywhere in the world without now, is really, for me, a kind of alpha omega symbol, totem of destruction, anti-destruction. And all of Tesla's work was about affirmation, expansiveness, and the feminized aspect of healing. Whereas all the other empirical modes of science, inquiry, conquest, dominion have been, again, patriarchal, destructive, devouring, parasitic. You need to devour something in order to take its life force in order to survive. So that's the parasite complex. The fallen light of Atlantis exemplifies that we're departing from now into the immanent, perennial, immortal paradigm. The Christed mantle, all of that stuff is what's emerging. And for sure, the life and times of Nikola Tesla exemplified the transition point between that and this.
You mentioned something, Sasha, about dark light Atlantis, or Atlantis dark light. Can you explain to me what that is? I'm not familiar with that.
I didn't say dark light. I said the fallen light of Atlantis.
Sorry, I apologize. Fallen
Yeah.
light of Atlantis. Yes.
So
Could you tell me?
what I'm referring to there is the thrall within which we have existed for the last 13,000 years, to be sure, since we last passed through the galactic orbit and passed through the photon band about 13,000 years ago, which again is the semi-arc of the grand precession of the equinox. So about 13,000 years ago, we passed through this photon band, which is essentially the breath of Allah, the compassions, the breath of God that issues out of the center point, the 0 point in the center of the Milky Way. You look at the spiral disk of the Milky Way with that 0 point in the center, there is a hyperdimensional inhalation and exhalation that occurs from that 0 point and that traverses the entire cosmos that we know. And every 13,000 years, we essentially, as a solar system, as a planet, as a plane of existence, we traversing the Milky Way, the fringes of the Milky Way, we come back every 13,000 years and intersect with that plasma beam or that photon band. Now, it takes us about 200 years for our solar system, our Earth, to move through that photon band and then traverse again a galactic sleep or for 13,000 years or a galactic day. So that's how you break down the grand precession of the equinox in the simplest possible terms. And I can tell you that 13,000 years ago, the last time we passed through that photon band, the photons are subdimensional and or hyperdimensional plasmoids, so to speak, that do an audit of the entire manifest realm for that 200-year period. As we compress into the center of that plasma beam or that photon band, it is conducting the audit of God. against all living systems, and saying, and doing a reading and saying, hey, how have you evolved? Do you want to play? Do you want to move into a higher spin rate? Do you want to move into the spiral of ascension? Or are you happy where you're at? Or do you want to move into a destruction, a death spiral? So an audit is done on the sum totality of the life expression of all living systems on the earth plane every 13,000 years. And the last time we passed through it, we chose Atlantis. We chose the destructivity. And so there was cataclysm. We all know that. So the creation myths all speak to the great deluge and the flood of Noah and the blah, blah, blah. So I'm saying that since that massive epoch of destructivity that occurred 13,000 years ago, that essentially formatted the geometry of the ethers for the last 13,000 years, for the great sleep. The galactic sleep cycle was predicated on that massive cataclysmic event. And we have been living variously in the thrall of the fallen light of Atlantis for the last 13,000 years. Now that we've been moving through the age of Aquarius, so to speak, from the Piscean age, moving through that photon band again, on the counterpoint of that grand precession, we are now broken through the center point, the compression point. We passed muster. That audit was done again. The breath of God literally permeated at the subatomic level every living system in the last few years and conducted that galactic cosmic audit. And we were not found wanting this time. This time, the collective pulse responded to the voice of God, the immanent voice of God. And we said, we're ready. We're ready for the upshift. And that's where we're now being taken. So the bifurcation is now a mechanical process, which is where the Anthony Fauci's and the Bill Gateses and the Nancy Pelosi's and the Joseph Bidens of this world lurch onto the international stage, and the crazy Argentinian popes, all of whom are subhuman creatures who in and of themselves have long since departed from the fabric of sentient soul and have become proxies of lower elemental demiurge, egregore, zeta reticulan draconian elements and forces. Fact. So, and the technocracy of the world is populated by such subhumans who have no empathy, no love, no capacity to love or be loved. And they're the ones who tried to exert one last thrall of dominion over humanity through mass sacrifice of innocence. But over the last 100 years, you could talk about it being the inception of synthetic molecules coming in 100 years ago through the Rockefeller-Rothschild covenant, which then led to the permeation of air, soil, water, and every living system being contaminated with synthetic molecules and poisons. So that's all part of the thrall of darkness that was reaching its compression point as we were going through our galactic audit, creating the texture against which we defined our light as the angelics resurrecting from this ancient galactic sleep. So I hope that more or less describes the process. We've broken through, past muster, and it's now a certainty. We will catch the so-called spiral of ascension because in real terms, we've already caught the front end of that wave.
Yes, no, I understand. I remember that.
What would be your timeline expectation, like the midpoint through the next 13,000 years, or will this happen rapidly?
Well, no, because we've already now departed time. So time is no longer a factor. This is the part that humanity is going to have to grapple with in the next few short years, that actually we've departed time. So time was always a myth. It was always a kind of, it was a kind of a galactical idea or a cosmic idea, but it in and of itself, it doesn't exist. It is a fiction which becomes a kind of realm within which the realm of duality is permitted to emerge as a compartmentalized or highly hermetically sealed aspect of the omniverse, which in and of itself becomes the cauldron of creation, so to speak. So Alpha Omega exists all around it. The ineffable, the immanent, the immortal, God, source, consciousness, Akashic, is around that, then there's this compression, a hermetically sealed zone within which the illusion, the Maya of our reality is now taking place. So the idea of time doesn't exist, space doesn't exist, there is no out there. Anyone who really understands the nature of reality knows that there is only singularity and ideation that stems from singularity. I will go further and say that there is no such thing as electricity or electrification in the sense that electromagnetism is espoused or posited by popular idiocy. We talk in terms of electromagnetics. There's no such thing as electro. There is only a magneto point. I mean, there's no magnetism, forgive me. Everything in this realm is electric in that sense. It moves outward from a magneto point, a singularity point. So this idea that this electromagnetics is nonsense. There is a magneto point, which is an absolute still point, which is the eternal mother and the atom seed of the womb of creation. And then everything else is electrification, moving outward, and so on in this expressed realm. So again, we get into hyperdimensional physics, and I don't claim to be an expert at it, but I certainly understand how to traverse that, these ideas, and they've made absolute sense to my reckoning. We just have to, I think, invert and flip everything we think we know.
Yeah, I think that's something to do anyway. Quick question. You mentioned God multiple times, and we were talking a few months ago, or a few weeks ago, maybe it was a few months ago, about how people define God. How do you define God?
Well, by recognizing at the essence the abomination in the concept. So the concept of God, as is popularly understood, is an abomination, is the abomination. So that's hard medicine for idolaters to grapple with. I'll grant you that. But for sons and daughters of God, so to speak, for the Christed ones, so to speak, for the meek who are about to inherit the earth, so to speak, at essence, they will understand what I'm saying. God is connected to this idea of an extraneous aspect or element outside of ourselves, which exists outside of ourselves, and which, by best accounts, demands worship and fear, guilt and shame, and all the rest of it. The angry, jealous gods of old, perfectly personified by the abomination of Jehovah and Yahweh. Angry, jealous gods of old, which are the same motherfuckers as Poseidon and Zeus. And again, domineering, patriarchal, terrifying creatures, which are actually the demiurge masquerading as God and feeding off, as the great parasite that God is in that context, feeding off the life force of true creation. And the more we abnegate and abdicate our life force, our God-given plasma, and our attention through the pineal, as we give and surrender and abdicate our sovereign expression, our divinity, toward the idea of God, we thereby manufacture and manifest these gods in the lower elemental realms. We've done this cyclically, civilizationally, incarnationally for millions of years, actually hundreds of millions of years. If we want to get down to the real nitty-gritty of the fiction of time, I will give you over 300 billion years in time. So that's how long we've been playing the human expression game. But honestly, none of that matters, because it's all perfectly anointed and perfectly appointed. To answer the question, fundamentally, the idea of God is an abomination. The knowledge of God, the being and the doing, as the avatars, the sons and the daughters of our divine mantle, Christed mantle, that's the living testament, that's the living gospel, and that is where each of us seek to be positioned. But we can only lay claim to that Christed mantle, as did the master from Nazareth, as did a number of great avatars and prophets, once we have completely disassociated from the idea of God. So when we're told that Jesus said this about the Father and said that about the Father, no, that's what some son of a bitch Roman centurion or scribe, having murdered the Cathars or the Essenes, wrote down as spells and bonds, which then became codified as the Bible and as the, even worse, the King James Bible. So all of these doctrines and scriptures and gospels are sheer unadulterated dogma, which are a defilement and a desecration of the life and times of Jesus, the man from Nazareth. And moreover, the message that these great savant masters espoused in the course of their lives. So the idea of God is an abomination. To have belief in a God is an abomination. Hard medicine for anyone to own if they are still locked in that feedback loop of offering up their life force to a demiurge, masquerading as a god.
I think I'm going to try to combine three different points you made into one question. One, Tesla had a belief of something specific about time, that he believed that there's a very thin veil in the nighttime around 3 a.m., where the veil between physical world and the spiritual world come together, and so he always made a point to wake up at that time. But you would be saying that is a delusion of sense for him. Is that correct, or are you familiar with his philosophy on this?
He's entirely correct.
Because he believed in that moment, that time. So go ahead.
If you understand real history, Jeff, which it's very hard for people to comprehend, because the written record has been erased and largely eclipsed from view. But up until fairly recently in our civilizational wheel, and I'm talking about in the 1700s and 1800s, we were generally going to sleep at sunset, waking up again at the witching hour, staying awake till the early hours of the morning, 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, eating, going around visiting friends and family, and then going to sleep again, and then waking up at dawn. We slept, seriously, I'm not joking. I mean, that's what humanity did. We had 2 sleeps, and we would wake up, and between midnight and 3 o'clock in the morning, we were normally out visiting family and friends and doing work and then going back to sleep and then waking up with the cockerel. So this is one of the great things that's been eradicated from our history. And then the 1260 Babylonian calendric system is imposed, fully locked and loaded, and because that's part of a natural cycle, is to go to sleep shortly after sunset, wake up in the witching hour, spend a few hours working, playing, doing what we do, go back to sleep, then wake up. And that is actually the correct process for humans and for our biorhythms. And that was eradicated from us. I think Tesla simply was falling back into attunement with the natural circadian and biorhythms.
Greg.
Wow. Well, I got a lot of questions. I still have questions about the first thing you said about the Tartarians, but I'll try to get the more recent things. Oh, so I'm curious now. You said that what Jesus said and what the Gospels report are at odds with each other. So for example, we've been told that Matthew was the author of Matthew, and he was also a disciple of Jesus, and that John was also a disciple of Jesus, and that Mark was written by, was a friend of Peter, who was a disciple of Jesus, and that Luke was a friend of the family, as it were. Anyway, so that's what gives them credibility. Would you say that those things are not true, or that they wrote things down? What they wrote down was not what we get I guess either what they wrote was not correct, or what they wrote was not what we're getting today, or which would you say, or that they really weren't who we think they were?
I think that it's absurd that we still care about these absurdities. I think it's absurd that we still look over our shoulder to the endemic bullshit that has been regurgitated and written and defiled and desecrated so many times over millennia, And we still look back at these apocryphal stories as though they matter. They don't matter. They never did matter. The living testament matters. The living gospel matters. And that is what the second coming of Christ, the Christed mantle, when sons and daughters of God, the meek, inherit the earth, and we all stand up together and we own our connection and our conjugation to the divine. That was the bidding of the Master Jesus, who I have a perfect love affair with, incidentally. But as I do with the Prophet Muhammad, peace upon him, and I studied all schools of Islam over 20 years ago, 25 years ago. So I understand and understood for a long time the mystical roots of Kabbalah and the Zohar and Sufism and Islam and the Christian Gnostic tradition. They are all the same. And these stories that issued of the apostles and the disciples and the number 12 and the number 13 is all symbology writ large in different psychocultural remits in order to harvest humanity into monotheistic culturalism, in order to contain us and then divide and conquer us variously into psycho-emotional hysteria and psychosexual adherence and addictions and psycho-intellectual hubris, so that we are constantly at odds with each other. This is the Tower of Babel. This is Babylonian witchery. And we've been caught up in that soup. And so the demiurge, again, the draconian lords of time, the archonic forces that have been parasiting off the God complex that we are negating within ourselves, is the foodstuff of these demiurges. And that's part of creation as well. So there's nothing wrong with that. But it is something which we can choose to transmute and transcend. And to be sure, at the collective level, that's precisely what we are doing right now.
So I guess what I'm curious to know is if the Gospels are not reliable for whatever reason, and people have been arguing about what's the truth, for since people have been around.
Yes.
So during the time of the Reformation, they said sola scriptura, meaning that we could, we can't know anything, and the church was messing everything up, and we didn't know what to believe, but we could count on that one thing. That was our rock that we could count on. So because otherwise we're just in this endless cycle of arguing with each other. So I'm wondering, what do you turn to say, this is the rock, this is the one thing I know for sure?
The atom seed of self-actualization, the spark of sentience, taking full ownership and containment of one's vessel, stopping blaming and judging. Never blame another. Never blame another, ever, for anything, and never judge. So when you learn to withhold judgment, and not just like bottle it up and bite your bottom lip like most good Christians, for instance, would do. They'd withhold their judgment, but they'd still be judging and condemning in the head and the heart. And so that becomes a cancerous tumor. So I'm not talking about that kind of withholding judgment. I'm talking about the withholding judgment where I am the vessel of Christ and I absolve and redeem all of that louche, all of that entropic, lower elemental stuff. And when we activate the temple, the true temple, and this gets to the answer of the question. When I say the atom seed of the self-actualized self, it is recognizing that this is the temple of Christ. This is the temple of God. And the synagogue is an abomination. The temple and the church and the cathedral is an abomination, is again an aggregate of plasma harvesting. It's a technology. And besides which, it was these latter-day monotheistic faiths that actually co-opted many of these citadels and many of these technologies and these so-called cathedrals, which were not cathedrals per se. They, as you probably know, were harmonium technologies based on cymatics and based on resonance and frequency, that were the bells and the spires, the dielectric antennas and the cymatic rose windows, and all of that, and the layout of these technologies predicated on very arcane mathematics and geometry and resonance to do with paramagnetics, dielectrics. Those temples, those cathedrals are technologies, but in the main were co-opted and then reduced into being places of worship, which is a nonsense. That they're supposed to be a harmonium technology that brings the tourist back into the earth plane and literally feeds our immanence, our immortality. And they did that. They used to do that. But modern history, rewritten multiple times in the last couple of thousand years, principally, but certainly since the end of the Second World War and the installation of the British curriculum in 1952, British Empire essentially rewrote history using the Midnight Masonic elements, which had infiltrated all the portals of power around the world through the Jesuit enclaves and through the confessor priests and all the bedchambers of the kings and queens of the Meiji, Imperial Meiji, and the Ming and all the ancient dynasties that were otherwise very enlightened, like the golden age of the Tartarians and the Confucianists and Zoroastrians. It's a desecration. And that's all that the scriptures have helped to do, is to divide and conquer and sequester our genius, our superluminal divine genius, into boxes, which are then pitted against each other. And that was what the great Hegelian dialectic that was being orchestrated in the last couple of hundred years under the Jesuitical device was leading to this heinous age of the what I would loosely call the Bush, Clinton, Obama cabal, that really the dirtiest temporal proxies of evil that have ever existed in the political domain. They make Caligula look like Alice in Wonderland because they were so fucking devious, this clutch, and what they were setting into play because of their base appetites. And they're just dirty humans and not elevated souls, no frequency running through their blood. And so they were beginning to engender a catastrophic takedown and harvest of humanity through orchestrating a clash of civilizations predicted by Huntington a long time ago, which was the Islam versus the Judeo-Christian world. So if you look now at the shit show taking place in Gaza, in Palestine, that is the atom seed of the play out of this theatrical production of the great Hegelian dialectic. And it is so stark, so evil, so self-evidential as to what it's taking place, what and who Netanyahu is, what and who the state of Israel is. It is draconian, Saturnian mythos made manifest, conducting what it's hoping will be such a diabolical assault against human reason and human flesh that it will ignite a world war. But it's not doing so. It's not.
Quick question, Greg. I want to double up on your question about what is his rock. What I was thinking, my question is so when you take the scriptures and you remove them, I think what Greg was asking, and I'm guessing, are there other texts that you rely on as something to refute the validity of the scriptures?
I love that question. And my short answer to you is no, hell no,
Okay.
Underscore, exclamation mark, underscore again. But if you're going to revert to something, you might want to go back to throwing the bones or the Hakati in sub-Saharan Africa. You might want to go back to crystal gazing. You might want to go back to I Ching. You might want to go back to reading the runes of the Nordic traditions. So there are other means of divinations which are connected more to the telluric and elemental intelligences that are very real methods of divination that actually do have living testament and the living gospel speaking through them. And I would suggest that those are more sacrosanct. Those are more sanctified means of reading spells and bonds. But my answer to the question is absolutely hell no, underscore. I don't want to be referring to codifications or spells or bonds whatsoever. I want a complete cessation, a complete eradication of spells and bonds in the midst. And I want humankind to resurrect now as Lazarus from the dead into the angelic template and the divine Christed mantle that we are all inheriting. I see that only possible once we've departed from written codifications, statutory bullshit, spells and bonds, doctrine, dogma, scripture, gospel. All of that stuff is dead and buried. And we must enter now the kingdom of God as the living testament, the living gospel. It doesn't get more simple than that, Jeff, but that's my answer.
Okay, very good. Greg.
Well, that brings, I mean, there's 1,000 questions, but I'm curious because earlier you spoke disparagingly of Zeus and Hera and the Greek gods,
Yes.
and yet you spoke in praise of the runes, and the pagans generally who used the runes had the Norse gods, which were another form of God. So I assume that you wouldn't like those gods any more than you like the Greek gods.
Respectfully, you've misrepresented the energy of what I was intending. What I said was that if you're going to go back to spells and bonds, you should do so more honorably by consulting crystals and runes and I Ching, which are marks, because those things are more connected to the elemental intelligences that we're invoking. There's a more honorable exchange there than simply reading spells and bonds laid down as dogma and doctrine under threat of fear, guilt, and shame. It's just more honest. But I did say, personally, disidentify altogether.
Yes, he did say that. Yeah,
did.
you were not recommending. It was very clear in my understanding.
No, I understood that. I just wanted to clarify that you're supporting one part of paganism and not supporting another part. And I get that.
Well, I'm not supporting it at all. And I would say that the sacking, I've got no problem with paganism. So let's have it. Okay, let's discuss that. I don't have a problem with paganism. The sacking of the Saracens and the pagans through Dum Diversis issuing out of the Vatican was one of the gravest crimes in the history of mankind, as was the doctrines of discovery, as we mentioned, granting the imperial crowns of Europe to go forth and conquest the black skin, brown skin, red skin, yellow skin people in the name of God, which is the heinous 500-year blood cycle that we are having to now absolve at the psycho-civilizational level. But the sacking of the Saracens and the pagans was an abomination. It was classic, the church coming in and destroying the relationship that the pagans and the Saracens had with the elemental gods. There's nothing wrong with having a relationship with Thor. Thor exists. Poseidon exists. Zeus exists. They all exist. So does Yahweh and Jehovah. It's just that they only exist by virtue of our permissions. And once we've withdrawn our permissions and done the soul revocation, we are not subject to their commandments any longer. Anything that commands you does not love humanity. There is no sovereignty there. It is a failure of sovereign jurisdiction to have a commandment. So any God that commands anything should be absolutely ignored and have the in its place. So
I want to take that really quick. If you have a grandchild or loved one, and you truly do love him, and you want to put them in your will, you're giving a last will and testament. It's a covenant that's one-sided. It says, if you do this, you will get this. My understanding, that's exactly what the commandments are. They're like a last will and testament. It's one-sided. If you do this, then this will be achieved. I don't see that as non-loving, because
it isn't.
If I love my family, I would leave them certain things that I don't have any say over anymore. If they do, then the legalities of the world will dictate that you get your...
It hasn't worked.
Like you wouldn't want to give money to a drug addict.
I certainly wouldn't make a last will and
death,
testament, but I just give it, if I want to donate it to them, I just donate it to the charity. But if I really love somebody, like my son, if I were to die tomorrow, I'll say, if you do this, then you'll get this, because I want him to achieve something great out of that. My understanding, that's what the commandments are. Yeah.
A parent can just command a child, you should do this. And, because I said so. Sometimes for a child, that's good enough reason,
Exactly. It'll never work. It hasn't worked in thousands of years. It's never going to work.
Saying that's bad for a parent to command
absurd.
a child?
It doesn't work. It can't work. You can't command anything. You can invoke, you can conjure, you can impress, in different ways. but it's the difference between the feminine and the masculine way of doing things in that sense. To command something is to invoke fear. Fear as a source code will
So a
always
parent should
corrupt.
never command a child to do anything ever.
Never, never. You shouldn't even speak to a child for the first few weeks of its life. You should sit back and listen to its gurglings, and you should gurgle back at it, but you should not speak to the child. Absolutely. You should allow a child, a newborn soul, to enter into this world, and you should lean in and listen to it. And if you did not start imprinting it with spells and bonds and base syntax, and mind fuck the thing out of its own superluminal genius by the time it's 3 weeks old or 3 months old, you would start to allow that creature to bring its star language into the temporal realm, and it would do it every single time. Moreover, that child by the age of 5 will probably be able to play a Mozart and Liszt. You know, we absolutely destroy the superluminal, supernatural genius that each of us are born to, because we are led to believe through this false patrimonial instinct that we should lean in and start to teach one another and impress ourselves upon one another and install our software into one another. This is false light.
So the concept of school is bad? We should
Abomination.
just get rid of all schools?
All schools should be got rid of. Children should be brought to sit in circles, barefoot under trees, in meadows, in enclaves, and they should be telling stories. They should be speaking to their dreams, speaking to their aspirations, exploring their creative genius. They would all be speaking 6 languages by the age of 9. They would all be geniuses by the age of 12. That is for sure. The Steiner model is a way shower there. The Krishnamurti model of 0 point education, it's not 0 point, but it's approaching, is a very good model. The 0 point education that we're about to institute in the New Earth sanctuaries in the US and in Mexico initially will demonstrate that out very, very quickly. We call it 0 point learning, but it's really about bringing, again, it's taking the feminine position and incubating, conjuring, inspiring, bringing it from the inside out, not the outside in. The outside in is the domineering way, where we try to force our will onto another. But when we invite the child's will to be done, their genius emerges. So the simplest way of doing that is the Ubuntu method in that sense, is you bring the children together every morning from the ages of 4 or 5 up until 15, 16. And they literally all, the first session of the day is sitting in circles and just babbling, talking, allowing each, pass the stick, allow each of them to explore. They can lie through their teeth. They can talk about dreams. They can talk about their plans. They can do whatever they want, uninhibited. You just allow them to be the story and to tell the story. You call that once upon a time, ... and you allow them to do it. Then later in the day, you let them go to the farm and learn how to milk goats. You let them climb trees and break limbs. You let them go and plow and till. You let them go and explore mathematics and geometry and the fractality of nature, you know, by mountain hiking or whatever. You get them back to the soil, the living soil, and you allow the elemental and telluric forces to do the imprinting. So in this way, we allow the superluminal genius in one generation to come in. We know enough about perinatal, about typhonic consciousness, about conscious birthing and conscious dying. We've been studying it for years with our New Earth University and within the metric of what we're now putting forth, to know that 0 point learning is the path of least resistance to the highest outcome. Yes, all schools should be absolutely dismantled. Universities are the gravest abomination really on the face of the earth in a sense, because no war economy would ever have emerged if it wasn't for academia being sequestered in the way it has been and allowing it to do the cult programming. And the grand deceptions of ages have been perpetrated principally through the portals of the hallowed schools of learning, the Princetons, the Yales, the Oxbridges, and the rest of them. Don't forget, it was linguists and, you know, Masons in those institutions which have essentially crafted the entire war economy. And we are now captivated in a cycle of war, disease, and poverty and debt, the likes of which this world has never seen, courtesy academia.
John.
I have some clarification about the 0 point learning. So you're not saying don't educate them, because obviously they wouldn't be able to articulate themselves in a manner that's to even achieve anything. So how would you approach fundamental learning so they can actually articulate and think mathematically? I'd be
John, you
curious.
have that. You have the facilities like how we're building out our 0 Point school is you have mathematics and you have physics and you have language and you have all of these different things.
So
But
there's a structure to
oh,
it.
yes, there's definitely a structure without any doubt, but it's something which the children are attuning to naturally and organically and wanting to play and wanting to participate there. But I guarantee you, again, the homeschooled kids that I know who are connected to the bosom of their mother and are able to play uninhibited and express in an uninhibited way are the ones who are speaking 3-4 languages and able to grapple with advanced physics by the time they're 14, 15, 16. So my takeaway is that education is an abomination, always was.
Yeah, but they'll have to be exposed to that. Let's say the mother doesn't have any aptitude for that.
Yeah.
So there would have to be some structure.
Yes. Well, you
to
create
introduce that.
Yes, of course. You create the facility in any given community or enclave whereupon and wherein they can gather and they can explore and express in an uninhibited way. But what you don't do is create tram lines, square rooms, mercury-infused light bulbs, and then a punishing and torturous agenda which completely sequesters their genius and punishes them for anything outside.
Yeah, I find it like bizarre. Like I have a 7-year-old and a 3-year-old. The 7-year-old in first grade, the structure is so ridiculous. It's super hard. It's a good school, but it's super hard. There's not enough. I think there should be play recess at least every 2 hours. There isn't. There's one, and they cram it, and then their homework on top of that, which is a lot for a little kid to manage.
And not
in fact, uniformly, almost everybody at that school will say, this is very frustrating. They cry at times, even just to get through it.
Right. And the suicides among students and amongst teachers and the misery and it's just not, we should be delighting in inquiry and learning. Learning and inquiry should be an absolute joy, an absolute delight. Unfortunately, we just imposed these old Victorian and Edwardian strictures. And believing that we were doing it by rote and doing it in a mechanistic, almost militaristic way. And unfortunately, it hasn't worked. It's been an abomination.
Well, now, like with the U.S. Department of Education, that was what, 78? Compared to that, to now, the test scores are like horrible. We used to be 1 and 2 in the world. Now we're 50th in
John,
the U.S. speaking.
John, it's well known that that a 15-year-old schoolgirl in the 1850s had a grasp of a general knowledge far greater than any PhDs in any university today. That's a fact. I mean, it used to be a pre-Victorian era and even up to the Victorian era, general knowledge in schools was phenomenal.
Oh, you look at their diaries, like I came across diaries of early 1900s. You're like, holy mother of Lord.
Right.
So Sacha, does that mean that those students who were prior to 1850 were doing school better than, I mean, obviously better than schools today?
Yes.
Is that, so you're endorsing those schools, just not endorsing
they weren't
at least
schools.
more so.
They weren't schools. They weren't schools. So it's not as though they were schools. They were communities, and they were communities that were self-organizing, self-assessing, and self-manifesting.
And that's my problem with the U.S. Department of Education.
Yeah, one size fits all. Bullshit.
Yeah. They called them schools. Sacha, I homeschooled my kids, and I did find that I had a whole bunch of different curriculums, and I sometimes this curriculum would work with this kid, and I'd do something different with another kid. You know, my son Tommy, he just was really attracted to wanting to, make things and build things. So I took him to the Science Museum, and we got involved in building robots there, and he loved it. Him and a bunch of adults. I'm just saying. And my other kids, they didn't care about that. So I didn't move them in that direction. So I don't know, I'm in support of what you're saying. I mean, you have to be willing to let each kid sort of express what they want. Unfortunately, I didn't teach them 6 languages, but we did do some Latin with all of them.
And with the pandemic and people able to look in to see what they were actually teaching the kids
Right.
through
Yes.
that caused an awakening because you're
Good
like,
point.
this is all political. It's ridiculous.
Good point, John. Absolutely. Yeah.
All right, I have a question. So for me, with parenting, and I do some homeschooling and some not. So my son went to school for a while, my oldest, and then homeschooled for a few years, and he really wanted to go to high school, and I let him take that, and he thinks he wants to go back. One of my other kids completely homeschool, and one's at school. So I'm more of a gradient. So I want to give a scenario, Sacha, and you can tell me what you would do, because I'm on a gradient. I don't believe no commands, because some will save their lives. For example, I coached soccer, youth soccer, and years ago, this boy, one of the things with soccer is freeze. It means everyone stops exactly where they are, and they became very trained to it. It's not the way we call it the F word. You don't want to use it very often, but because it really inhibits their normal playtime. But one day they were at this field. The game is here on the field. The cars are racing by along the highway. The ball rolls out. The boy runs aimlessly to the road. I turn around, see at the corner of my eye, yell, freeze. He stops on the edge of the highway as the car zips by.
Wow.
That's a command that saved his life.
Let me
What
debunk-
alternative, what's wrong with the scenario that led up to that?
I'll tell you.
Okay.
I'll tell you happily. I'll tell you happily. So obviously, you can't be that reductive to take what I said and apply it to every little minutiae.
No, I said that's I'm on a gradient with this. Yeah. Okay.
Yes, you may be on a gradient. That's good. But I will say this, and I'll use two examples. And I'm sorry I can't remember the name of the town in Germany, but there is a town in Germany that about 30 odd years ago, certainly was over 2 decades ago, decided that they would eradicate all, and I mean all, rules on the road. They had no signposts, only names of places, no stop signs, no traffic lights, no lines on the road, none. It was an experiment, and it worked. And I think it was something like in 15 years, they didn't have a single incident.
I believe it. I believe
And
it.
there was because everyone in that town was forced to a return to the psionic, almost telepathic, almost psychic, intuitive state of grace in order to function. And we've seen this play out in India and in China, where they're also doing experiments and removing all traffic lights and allowing these huge roundabouts where millions of people are traversing every day. Now they're just finding their own way, and actually now the traffic's moving. They're freeing up the economy in these cities because they've removed all the strictures. That's fact, and that's scientifically evidence. I could do a 2-hour lecture just on that. Bali, where I have my home, is a classic case in point, where you have 7-year-old kids on motorcycles without helmets, literally, constantly on the road, driving at 70 kilometers an hour. Now, that doesn't give me much pleasure. And if it was my child, I'll be honest with you, I would be horrified, terrified, and I'd rather manacle my child to a tree than let them do that. But the Balinese do let them do that. The Balinese allow their kids completely unfettered access to reality, and the kids can do what thou wilt. In that sense, they're allowed to just fully express themselves. And there's a bit of abominable behavior that happens, and then the community polices it, and people learn. And I'll tell you, there was almost never an accident. And if it is, it's probably caused by an expatriate being nervous on a motorbike or in a car. So there's this endless kind of motion and movement. And to all intents and purposes, it's very dangerous. It's like your kid running into that, that steel curtain. But the psionic intelligence, once it's allowed to activate, and the telepathic, psychic, intuitive faculties are allowed to activate, then that becomes the preservation complex.
I completely know what you're saying. In the world that we're living in, there's the kid being free on the field that wants to run wherever the ball goes, and second, there's this construct called the road and the freeway and its rules, and those two worlds will clash because of some disharmony. I understand exactly what you're saying. Greg or John, do you have more on this?
Well, I was just going to say, in Germany, the Autobahn has, for decades now, there's no speed limit on the major freeways of Germany, and it's never been a problem. So that's just, and I was looking for this city that you talked about. I didn't find it, but I'll keep looking.
I'll see if I can find it as well after the fact. But we were studying it. We were studying it about 10 years ago, and I was using that as a premise of some of the lectures I was doing over 10 years ago, and we were fascinated about it. I think it begins with an N and has Dorf at the end, I think.
Don't they all? Neuendorf.
All right, let's shift gears a little bit. I'm really fascinated in some other areas too. I wanted to move into outer space concepts, if we can, and the spiritual realm in this regards, if that can be made. But I want to go just back to the moon landing. Just tell us everything you know and your thoughts on the moon landing and the space program in general.
It's a real hard one. I mean, because, it's not that the disinfo bothers me, but when you get into double disinfo, it starts to become problematic. Like I was watching something on a Facebook thread last night where an actor, I can't remember his name, but he's fairly well known, was saying that, oh yeah, no, he spoke to Tom Cruise, had a conversation with Tom Cruise one day on set, and he spoke to Tom about the time that Tom had worked with Stanley Kubrick, and on the I think it was the Eyes Wide Shut.
Right.
And he said to Tom, are you aware of the fact that Stanley Kubrick was recruited to film the lunar landing back in 1969, that he was used to film a kind of makeup scenario in the Nevada desert, I think it was, where they did a false filming as a kind of preemptive thing. But the actor did not exclude the fact that he thought that they still went to the moon and filmed on the moon. So he was creating disinfo without even knowing it. And Tom Cruise was answering and saying, yes, he was aware of that, blah, blah, blah. But the fact of the matter is that the truth is far more likely that Stanley Kubrick was recruited in order to film in 1969 a cryptic, a fake lunar landing, and that was beamed back into Cape Canaveral and then syndicated to the world, which was part of a devastating psyop and a lie in order for the US to apparently win the space race over communist Russia, and that was a very strategic chess move on the Babylonian chessboard by the deep state, by the American secret space program. And that's the fact of it. And Stanley Kubrick had been, at that time, was a young student, a very brilliant cinematographer, but had been inveigled into doing that film. How? Well, by CIA or whatever coming and knocking on his door and saying, listen, son, do something for your country. We need you. You're good. We'll bankroll your films in the future. You're set up for life, whatever. However the deal was struck, it certainly worked. Kubrick went on to become one of the great supremos in cinematography. And I know that the last film he made, Eyes Wide Shut, was a really important piece because that was his apology. And that was him trying to atone at the end of his career for what he had done, that he recognized later in life that the psyop that he had helped perpetrate had really helped the world take the left fork in the road and allowed the deep state a very unique kind of hegemony over our reality. And when he was making that film, Eyes Wide Shut, just so happened that my girlfriend at the time was in the film with Nicole Kidman and Tom Cruise, and she was living with me. And the blonde, beautiful girl who was naked for most of the film being sacrificed by those Satanists. But she told me when she was coming home from set, as the film rolled on, she was saying, this is the weirdest film in the history of cinematography. She says every 2 or 3 days, Stanley breaks the set down. It gets shipped to somewhere else in Greater London and built in another facility, but it's the same set. And we are all put in blacked out vehicles when we meet for muster in the morning and driven to different locations. It's the same set, but it's constantly moving every few days.
Why?
Well, because Kubrick knew he was being tagged, and what he was doing was very dangerous. So he was putting security measures into the filming. And of course, he dies at the end of the making of the film. And I think 15 or 16 minutes is removed from the film, which was the essential telling of what happened in the film and what he was trying to tell us about, that these Babylonian satanic Luciferic elements have been controlling all of our reality. And that, again, was his atonement in a sense, and he died. But the disinformation that was coming out of a young actor this week on Facebook about the life and times of Kubrick was double disinfo, and really helps throw the game badly. And that's my great concern is the double disinfo piece. It's almost impossible now to navigate the truth of reality by looking over our shoulder. And Jeff, don't forget, the reason why these AI algorithms like Midjourney have now proliferated in the last year or two, and allowing a 9-year-old kid to literally create a Walt Disney film using their imagination, talking to an AI program, and 90 minutes later, you've got a Hollywood epic. This is insane. We've got to this point. Why is that incredible technology being unleashed on humanity to cover the spoor, cover the tracks of these satanic forces that have...
I believe that. I believe that exactly.
Yes, they've been caught doing things on film, and the fact that they can now say, "Oh no, that was just
that was AI." Yeah.
Right.
Yes, there was a lot of danger surrounding that movie, because that's exactly what he was doing. Is he was exposing the cult end of what they're doing. That's why he was moving. But a lot of the movie was, most of it was filmed in his own house too.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
all right. So that's the why he was doing it. He was very concerned. He did not let his wife leave his house at all, and she was happy to do that. She was a famous Austrian actor. And said, okay, well, we're going to get married, and if you're going to keep me in this house, you're going to build me a big, beautiful garden, and I'm going to paint, and you're going to pay for all of my paintings. And he said, no problem. And his daughter was a little bit of rebel. I don't know if you've ever met his daughter. She was a little bit of a rebel, and so the two of them butt heads, and she did not want to live in that life sheltered, but that's what he was doing. There's a sign a mile down from his road saying, thinking about visiting the Kubricks? Think again, turn around. You know, I mean, so he's very, 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 he was very protective, not paranoid, but he put up a shield around him. And that's what everyone had to sign NDAs, all the actors, everyone. They had no idea what the movies were about. So that's the answer to those questions. Now, Greg, you're going to bring something up for Sacha.
Yeah, well, we were talking about the moon.
Yeah, I wanted to get back to that too.
I wanted to get your opinion, Sacha, on the moon. There's a couple of possibilities, assuming that, yes, it's true that the whole thing was made up. One is that they actually did go to the moon, but they couldn't show it or didn't want to show it. Two, they figured out that they couldn't get to the moon, and so they wanted to save face and close out the program, and so they did it that way. The third is that they discovered something, that they didn't want people to know about.
Now, that was the Russians. So
or maybe they knew this stuff in the first place.
They never
and this whole stuff about Antarctica and all that stuff.
The
moon's hollow.
So I'm just
I find it bizarre that they haven't been there since.
There's a lot of things that are bizarre around it.
The
Okay,
US
go ahead.
never went to the moon. The US never went to the moon. The Russians got to the moon. The Russians got to the moon.
Okay, that's a new one. I haven't heard that one.
And the Russians withdrew once
the
they
60s.
saw what they saw. I was approached about 15, 16 years ago by Al Bond, the erstwhile richest man in Australia. If you remember Alan Bond, he won the Gold Cup, and with the Bond University still standing. At one point, he was one of the most famous characters in the world, along with the Kerry Packers and what have you. Al Bond was a friend of mine up until his death a few years ago, and he was a very good man. Al Bond had gone to prison and became probably the biggest bankrupt in Australia's history at a given point, because he refused to join the Midnight Masons. So Al Bond, when he was the richest man in Australia, and I remember when I first met him, and he took me out to dinner in London, and I was asking him about his glory days. I said, Al, how rich were you? He said, oh, mate, I have no idea. But he said, I'll tell you what, one day I woke up in the morning and I used to walk through my apartment, penthouse apartment. He said, I always used to have like 3,000 envelopes would have come through the door on the post. And I'd wait till 8 o'clock till my staff arrived. They'd go through all the post. And then, I just lived in my penthouse overlooking Sydney or wherever it was on the Gold Coast. And he said, I tell you what, one day I did open up an envelope. I just thought, what the hell? Open up an envelope, and fuck me if there wasn't $3.5 billion in just one of my bank accounts, personal accounts. So that was 30, 40 years ago.
I'm waiting for that to happen myself.
Yeah.
Well, I said to him, and how did you make your money? He said, because I said respectfully, Al, you don't have a PhD, and he said, very simple, lateral thinking, mate. He said when they were putting up to tender the biggest pipeline in history, which was an oil pipeline from one side of Australia to the other, all these clever big oil exploration groups were putting in their $1 million tenders, clever ideas of how to build the pipeline. He just decided to set up 2 crews on either end and build at the same rate, and they meet in the middle. So he cut the build time in half through lateral thinking, got the contract, became the richest man in Australia. Anyway, bottom line is, Al Bond, I've forgotten why I mentioned Al Bond. I was setting this up. What was the, forgive me, what was the impetus of the question?
About the moon, dealing with the moon somehow?
So Al Bond came to me a few years later after I first met him, and asked me if I wanted to get involved, Humanitad, my foundation, involved. He needed me to do some very, very sassy PR at a kind of behind the curtain intergovernmental level, which I've done for almost 25 years. At that time, it was certainly over 15 years. And I told Al, I said, well, I mean, you're going to have to give me the full backstop of the story. He said, it's simple, mate. He said, the Russians have approached me, the space program. They want to rebuild their space program into a commercial program. He said, I've got the money and access to the money to make this happen. They need the money. They've got the infrastructure. They want to send their rockets back to the moon, i.e. they've been there before, in order to scoop up helium-3 on the surface of the moon and bring it back to Earth to power up Earth. Because one cargo hold of helium-3 with one mission to the moon can power up the whole of North America for a year. So ending the energy game and starting a whole... So that was many years ago. The Russians, Al Bond, I was sitting with these people. I was involved in the negotiations. We ended up not moving forward with that prospect. There were too many political dramas. But that was a time when I had it corroborated that the Russians did go to the moon, whereas the Americans did not, by best accounts. I knew Ed Mitchell not well, who purportedly went to the moon, but Ed never really gave out much of the real story, and none of them did, you know. I knew Dr. Brian O'Leary, I think he was the Apollo 17 mission leader astronaut, was a very close friend of mine before he died, living in Ecuador. And Brian used to stay with me and Meredith, his wife, in London whenever he was touring or lecturing in Europe. And so we got to know each other very well. And Brian told me a whole heap of shit about the secret space program and about what he knew, not what he conjectured, you know, up to and including what almost got him killed by the US jackals when the Japanese space program sent co-financed the Saturn probe mission with NASA, sending that probe to Saturn, and what was coming through on the live feeds to Japan and to NASA was, as the probe was approaching Saturn, they could see alien craft over 200 miles long mining the rings of Saturn. And the Japanese wanted the world to know about it. And the Americans told the Japanese, don't you dare. The Japanese said, go to hell. We financed this mission. We'll do what we like with the intellectual property. Fukushima, bada boom, bada boom. So, you know, big moves. But Brian O'Leary, again, former Apollo mission leader, he was supposed to lead the mission to Mars, incidentally. I think it was 1978 or 79. That was then stymied by Congress when they withdrew the budget. The Brian was pissed off when he realized that there was always a kind of front of house NASA and a secret space program as well, that where they are really doing certain explorations. And whether they got to the moon or not, I don't actually know, but I do know that the Russians got ahead of them.
So did the Russian landing, was that after Kubrick or before?
My understanding is it was all happening more or less at the same time. It was in the late 60s, and that the Russians had got there ahead. The Russians are far better at keeping secrets than the Americans are, let's face it. And that they had interfaced, they landed in one lunar crater. I can't remember the name of the crater. And there were a series of alien, I think, artifacts or aliens and their craft or whatever on the perimeter of the crater within which they landed. and then they were told in no uncertain terms to get back in and depart, and they did. That's my
Told by
understanding.
who?
By these extraterrestrials.
All right, I got a couple questions. There's three general beliefs, maybe four, three general beliefs of what extraterrestrials are. Some are saying they're just purely intelligent life from other planets. Some saying that they're interdimensional beings. Some saying they're just purely spiritual beings, angels or demons. I think Tucker Carlson just said that's his belief. And then there's maybe the fourth that they just simply don't exist. Where do you land on that?
You know, Tucker Carlson is a wonderful, wonderful man, and I don't know him. I received a FaceTime call from him in Bucharest when I was there last about 6, 7, 8 months ago. I spent a couple of minutes on the phone just saying hi, bye. Seems to be an incredible human being, and I think he's just one of God's anointed ones at our time. But I don't believe that he has a very comprehensive grasp of these more esoteric elements. People like myself have been at it for 3 decades. I think I've got a far more comprehensive grasp of it. Angels are not demons, but certainly demons do masquerade as angels. But that does not make angels the same thing as demons. So there's a conundrum there, that one needs to transcend, transmute in understanding. So angelics self-exist. The demonics, the diabolicals, have to some extent the capacity to masquerade as angelics. And that represents to the true seeker a real conundrum where you are required again to move into your psionic intelligence to be able to determine what you're looking at. Is this an angelic or a demonic? And that's appropriate to be pulled into your highest cogitation. But it's a similar conundrum to you following the light at the end of the tunnel when you die, or should I say, making the mistake of following the light at the end of the tunnel when you die. Because what you are likely to be drawn toward, albeit looking as though it's baby Jesus or Magdalene waiting for you, it is likely to be a 3-foot Zeta Reticulan alien gray, projecting as Jesus, projecting as the God that you worshipped whilst you were alive. So, you know, again, holographic heavens and hells, which are still contained within the thrall of tick-tock time and connected to a feedback loop of reincarnation back into this earth plane, that's part of a greater conundrum that we should be focused on. But the only way we refine the inner lens, the spiritual lens, is when we are seated perfectly in that throne of actualized self. And as I said on a 3-hour interview I did with a Tim Ray's show yesterday, do what thou wilt is not the same thing as I am that I am, or my will be done. My will be done is you're only able to utter that if you are in phase coherence with thy will be done. Because if you dare to utter my will be done, and you are not in coherence with thy will be done, you'll get hit by a bus or a meteorite or a snake bite. It is very dangerous utterance. So, but it's not to be confused, my will be done, as an utterance, which is a godly utterance or a Christed one. It is not to be confused with do what thou wilt, you know, huge distinction.
So, but do you believe that these extraterrestrials or these beings, Zeta Reticuli, the Greys, do you believe that they are interdimensional beings, spiritual beings, or just from another planet traveling around mining stuff?
They are you and I, in a sense, in future timelines.
Okay.
If you go back into the Mobius loop of the fiction of time and how so-called timelines have orchestrated and confluenced over literally billions of years. And again, I'll take you back about 300 billion years, longer in point of fact, 3 times longer than that. But it's more relevant to speak in terms of when the humans were conceived into this fiction of reality, which is about 300 odd billion years ago. So it's a very, very hard one to put your finger on. But a Zeta Reticulan alien gray, or any number of these iterations of the demonic, are indeed in the demonic realm in that sense, and are of the demonic realm in that sense, albeit some of them can transpose into the temporal realm and physically taser you or psychically attune to you or eviscerate you. So there's such a complex spectrum of these, let's say, malevolent extraterrestrial / demonic elements in this universe. That's a fact. But what are they in real terms? I think you may find that they are us 27,000 years and 43,000 years down the line, once entropy is fully kicked in, functioning on the most limited bandwidth of sentience, so to speak. And Al Bielek and those other stories of former US military operatives who were part of these military exercises or black operation exercises testified to the fact when they returned from time travel. And you better believe that it is very possible to time travel. It is not complicated. Jump gate technology is not that complicated. You know,
Can I just jump in? How does time travel make sense if time doesn't exist? Which I thought
because time in and of itself doesn't exist, but this complex of a holographic field of limitless. I was trying to explain it earlier, Greg, and I can't do any better.
Can I just throw in a maybe what I think you're saying? Basically, that time and space, you said that neither one exists.
Yes.
So is that sort of the idea that only consciousness exists and that we're just all imagining the reality, what we think is reality around us? Or
maybe the question should be what is real as opposed to what is not foundationally real. And what is real, foundationally real, is a state of witness. To be in a state of witness is absolutely real. But when you're talking in terms of time, as is popularly understood, it categorically cannot exist in the way that it is understood, which is there was an inception point, a big bang, and then there is a alpha omega points. And here's a chronology. It's one singularity, and we are nested perfectly in that. You can call that God if you like, but that inception point, which is it's a living principle. It's not a thing. It's a living principle. It's the principle of prior unity, as the great Adidas Samraj put it. That exists and self-realizes and self-manifests and self-fulfills. And everything out there is an extension of that. So I am that thou art. I am you, Greg. You are a different aspect.
I knew there was something going on.
Right.
I see the resemblance too.
Right. We're different aspects of the same living principle, seeking to see ourselves in this multiplicity of expression, and in the process to fulminate into ever higher octaves of expression in affirmation, creative expansiveness, and blah, blah. So time, this linear idea of time, is simply a framing of how we construe the realm of duality. And the realm of duality, as I said at the first question, is simply a hermetically sealed quanta within the embrace of the alpha omega, wherein we are able to play the fiction of time. And so this Mobius loop of time is limitless. So to answer the question that Jeff was putting, which was a good question, who or what are these alien grays? Where do they issue from? They are an extension of ourselves in part of this Mobius feedback endless loop that have gone rogue, taken the left fork in the road on different expressions, and have come back into the temporal field, courtesy probably of 1946, 47, 45, 43, where we were the Pacific Atoll testings and when we were splitting the atoms, and we were renting the fabric of time-space, creating hyperdimensional, interdimensional flares or beacons going up, which grant permissions to these hollow echoes of ourselves in the future to come back and try to resuscitate themselves through life force to cannibalize and parasite off us. So it's part of the same Yahweh, Jehovah complex. So the Zeta Reticulan alien gray, Yahweh, Jehovah, angry, jealous gods are all part of the same inexpressible, inexhaustible expression seeking to animate itself in the field that doesn't really exist. So it's the best way I can put it. So time in and of itself cannot exist.
So
I
there's a
just
lot
like
of
to, can
Go
I
ahead,
just
Chris.
submit quickly that I see time, I define time actually in terms of cause and effect. In other words, we know that event A caused event B, therefore event A happened before in time event B. There's a cause and effect relationship, and therefore there must be time for there to be cause and effect. So I just wonder what you think of that.
Within that limited framing that we are playing in, it's a sandbox that we've created for ourselves through ideation in which to play the game you just expressed. But what you should be doing, in point of fact, is standing absolutely on the nexus point, in the center point of then, and then, or before and past and future. You should be standing on the indivisible line, which is right here, right now, and reckoning with the fact that the past is right now and the future is right now, and it's all in the realm of the imagining. But there is no time that separates the past and the future. What we're doing right now as a species, as a genus of the hominid human Adamite, as it confluences perfectly with its angelic template and resurrects as 3D temporal angelics, which is what's going to be happening in our lifetime, that we are terminating the relationship with time. And in fact, the resurrection of the angelic template and framing of reality that is now the emergent reality frame, I call it the new earth dawn or the new earth horizon, that is only, don't ask me about those balloons again, I don't know. That is only able to manifest in diametric proportion to the degree to which we relinquish the idea of time. Otherwise, we cannot move back into the immanent immortal frame. So again, we can continue the pedantics and the semantics of then and now and alpha, omega, inception point, closure point, but they don't exist. They are ideas that extend from the living present. And once we've brought the past and the future, epigenetics teaches us this. It's all an echo in the blood. I call it the resurrection of the ancestral blood song, which is how we forgive and redeem the crimes of our ancestors, our forebears, which was us invariably, and therefore we're continuously at war with ourselves and with one another because we are still enchanted by the trial of separation, when the trial of separation was only bad dreaming. We only need to take the throne of actualized self, the Christed mantle, which is exactly what the Master of Nazareth was appealing to us, until the priest bankers got hold of his gospel and maligned it and desecrated it, turned it into a codification to harvest humanity for dominion and control. Just take the throne of self. Be crowned upon the throne of self. That's the my will be done, because it's perfectly coherent with thy will be done. I am the same as my God. There is no God out there. I am the enactment, the embodiment, the manifestation of the living principle of prior unity. And this is how I become the absolver, the redeemer. I heal the ancestral blood. I return to the immanent immortal flame. I resurrect from the dead, from this death, spectrum of death, and which is codified by time. So, it is an enigmatic subject, but it does keep bringing us back, in a sense, to the same central narrative.
I have one last
Another
question on
question.
time. I didn't get to ask my last time. If time doesn't exist, why is it so easy to measure?
It's not easy to measure at all.
We measure it directly in science experiments, like clocks and that. And
You can't measure it. Respectfully.
okay, then explain. I'm curious.
We think we can. Yeah, absolutely. It appears that way, but it doesn't actually work that way. And I'll tell you why. Because if you go into a coma for 17 years and wake up, you think you were asleep for 2 seconds. That there is the living proof that you can't measure time. We think we can measure time. And of course, if you're stuck in think and in thought and in psycho-intellectualism, then you're lost to the immanent, you're lost to the pulse of reality, and you just think. And you will think yourself into the grave. And you'll probably be clawing at the air as we tip into the grave. We have to be very careful if we think too hard. No, time doesn't exist. I've lived long enough to know that it doesn't foundationally exist, but our imagining of it, our adherence to it by programming death into our DNA, by wishing each other happy birthday, and happy anniversary and celebrating this abomination of 1260 time, which is the very prison that we seek to escape through enlightenment.
So we can't celebrate your birthday?
Ever.
That's
I
what the
never
balloons are
celebrate-
for.
I
Oh,
never
yeah, that's what I thought.
We literally program death into our DNA in the sweetest possible way by celebrating time in any way, shape, or form. And when the collective humanity relinquishes its adherence to 1260 time, which is a Babylonian construct, we will absolutely have a morphogenetic upshift. The noosphere will activate, and the kingdom of heaven and the patterns of perfection will manifest in this realm. And that we will witness in our lifetime, to be sure.
All right, so I'm not sure I understand it all. I mean, if we're in this 13,000 year cycle, which I believe we are, then I don't know how I don't understand it. If there's no time, how we could be in this cycle. So let me go into something that maybe I can get my head around.
Answer that question then.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Right. A cycle is not time. I did say that we have to use the language that is commonly understood, or you're going to have to step into telepathy with me, which I'm actually good with.
I'll try.
Yeah, well, we could do it, but we have to be blindfolded in a dark room. And
All right, let's move on that. All right, go on.
exactly. You want to play the shamanic,
It's
maybe
not into
start with
that.
some mushrooms. But the point being, so long as we're having a conversation, I'm being courteous to use language that I don't even approve of.
Okay.
Time is bullshit. It's death. It is death spiral mechanics. But when we talk about the great yugas, again, that is a self-existing phenomenon, but it describes the hermetically sealed cycle within which we are choosing to manifest or dream these ideas of time, of alpha omega, and within that cycle of time, which we can largely measure, because it's cyclical and we are moving around the sun, and the sun is moving. That is stuff that we can observe with the senses to a great extent. And we know that it takes us that period of so-called time to move around the entire perimeter of the Milky Way, our solar system, our plane of existence. And then there are certain phenomena that occur as we're moving, but it is not time. It is a constant self-revealing, self-fulfilling moment, that it's a living moment. And the idea of time is something we dream into that realm, which then creates death and allows us to be harvested and reincarnated and reincarnated and reincarnated. And it's our life force that is hidden from ourselves, that we actually carry as the temple of Christ, the temple of God. The human, the angelic human, is the creature that is feeding all of the false light, the draconian elements, the demons, and so on. So if you want them to disappear from your realm of expression, then you need to take the throne of actualized self. And they no longer exist. They literally phase conjugate out of existence. They are no longer part of the thrall of your expression. That's how it happens at the individual level. And now as we're moving to a collective morphogenetic upshift, we're going to see that happening at the collective level.
Interesting. All right.
So,
Right, John.
so getting back to the galactic thing, it's 26,000 years that it would take to go around the galactic circle or whatever. And so does that mean, is it, or that the Earth spins around, we call that a day, and there's 365 of those and a quarter to get around for the Earth to revolve around the sun? You're saying none of that's real, or that those numbers don't mean anything? I mean,
again, I'm talking about what is foundationally real is a state of witness. We are trying here to enlighten. You wouldn't be doing a podcast which is based on truthful inquiry with an idiot bohemian like me if there wasn't a central remit here to inquire toward our enlightenment. I'm assuming that. So we're all of us seeking relevancy, which is seeking truth, which is seeking enlightenment. I'm doing the best I can to answer temporal questions, but actually these are important questions, by saying that our enlightenment will never be found by having a circle-jerking conversation, not with you guys, but generally as humanity, having circle-jerking conversations constrained within the parameters of 1260 time. So if we truly seek pure truth, a central sun, pure truth, enlightenment, bodhisattva, God status, Christ status, if we truly seek freedom, we truly seek redemption, absolution, and salvation, then we need to learn to position our state of witness in that which is foundationally real, and acknowledge and accept the fact that the rest of what we're talking about is playing in a sandbox of duality, which is never going to take us to our enlightenment. So I'm saying there is a bifurcation psycho-intellectually that we're each of us in the world going to have to enact and embody in our lives as we consciously depart from childish things like the idea of time, like the idea of spin cycles, like the idea of an expanding universe, like the idea of TikTok, you know. So it is a complex, we're probing complex areas of consciousness, and I'm saying that we will each have to bifurcate to that which is, from that which is foundationally real, which is a state of witness, to the sandbox that we're playing in. Because we reach a point in psycho-intellectual inquiry, which does move through the philosophies and the philosophical aspects, but it arrives at a point which you would have to call the ineffable, that which cannot be spoken to with words or understood through words.
All right, I'm curious to see if you know anything about this or you heard it. If not, we can talk about something else. But have you heard of the Black Pyramid of Alaska?
Yes, I have.
What can you tell me about that? I only recently heard about this.
Steph, I don't know enough about
Okay.
it.
I don't think anyone knows a whole lot about it, but
I've never heard of it.
Exactly. But my
Okay.
understanding is that it's one of many that are likely to be surfacing.
Yeah, so there was this there's an episode, I could probably find it if you on the Y-Files just came out and it's pretty fascinating. But basically there was a military base and people went to look and there's this, you could see on Google Earth, it's actually, that section is whited out.
Yeah.
And so people have been taken, a couple people have reported military and they get there and there's just this old shed. It's really cold. They go underground and they come and there's this, I don't know, Black Pyramid.
Did you see any of the images of the underground alien base in the Buceci Mountains in Romania?
I don't think so.
I've seen a number of bases and I'm not sure I've seen
Greg,
that
see if
one
you can
though.
find it. Maybe
Buceci
share it.
Mountains, I am. I also looked up the Black Pyramid.
Are you seeing these images?
Yeah,
Yes.
I see 'em.
These are some of the images taken from the underground alien base discovered by the military in Romania, reported, alas, to the US military in, I think it was 2003 or 2004, and have been sequestered by Delta since. And I've been working with some military folks in Romania in the last 2 years to try to prosecute to get back in. I mean, this is stuff that the world needs to know about, but this is what was discovered.
Nice. Beautiful pictures. Wow. So how old are these things?
This is a quarter of a kilometer pyramid, high pyramid inside the cave system.
Wow.
So no one really knows, except what I've heard from the Miltel people that I deal with in Bucharest, and I'm there 5 or 6 times a year because I've got a company and an office there and partners there in the military. And what I've heard is that it's holographic. On the inside, there's holographic technology that is activated by the DNA of whoever is holding a particular, placing their hand over a particular button in one of the laboratory rooms, but labyrinthine facility with effigies and statues, massive, that they don't understand, and tramways or tunnel systems that go to, I think, 3 or 4 continents or 5 continents. So I went on to Romanian national TV last year on I think it was a 3-hour show. And the network was closed down, and threat of prosecution after I went on that show. There are definitely things there that no one wants, that the powers that be or powers that were don't want humanity to know about. But what we think, and I'm fairly certain from the works that I'm doing in investigating this particular facility, is that this may well have been the laboratory of Ninhursag, the chief science officer, daughter of Ra, going back to Enki and Lil, which the Sumerian cuneiform, the oldest written record, and teaches us about the Enki and Lil mythos. So it would appear that this may well be the actual laboratory wherein the most recent seeding of the human, the Adamite, occurred with our star nation, angry, jealous gods, so to speak, came in to seed us into the earth again. God created us in 7 days, remember? And all of that. So very enigmatic subjects and stories, all of which are being revealed now as part of the great revelation that's upon us.
I did do a little digging on this. First of all, Bucechi has a very strange spelling. It's Bucegi, the Bucechi Mountains. I wouldn't have pronounced it that way. But the article that I was looking at talks about the people that were there were known as the Dacians. They were there about the time of Christ, give or take a century, and they were conquered by the Romans, and they were pagans. They worshiped some kind of...
And that's classic Midnight Mason intervention in history, written up as Wikipedia or anything that you can Google search.
Right.
So,
you can dig deeper.
Romania precedes Rome. Rome was named after Romania. The world has never taught that. And the Romanian language precedes Latin vastly. There is also written records in Romania that predate the Sumerian cuneiform by thousands and thousands of years. That's part of the stuff I'll be...
So you think these pyramids are much older? Have they dated these things under the ground?
No, well, if they do, that's information that's being very heavily sequestered. But you can be sure that these are at least 200,000 years old.
Mm-hmm. So, but in comparison now, I'm not sure how high the Great Pyramid is. You said this was 200 meters high, this one that's underground? And the Great Pyramid,
that one was 200 meters, yeah.
Yeah, but how big is the Great Pyramid? Any
I
idea?
don't know. I should know that, but I don't know.
It's not, it's bigger than that, but still, that's pretty big. I'm just trying to get a comparison.
Half the size still of the big Nubian pyramids, which I was at in the Sudanese desert a few months ago. So, and studying those. But to be sure, the fact that so many pyramids in Bosnia, I just got a message yesterday from Dr. Sam in Bosnia. The Bosnian pyramids, the Chinese pyramids, the Indonesian pyramids, Mexican pyramids, all around the world, pyramids are revealing. And some of what we thought were hills or mountains,
many of them are underground then, right. And they're all over the world? Or are they in specific locations? Do you think their locations are significant?
Well, they're significant in as much as they appear to be awaiting critical telluric lines or
ley lines.
Yeah, of the earth.
Right, so the Giza pyramid is 95 meters. I just looked it up. 95 meters.
So this is bigger than the Giza pyramid?
That's interesting. Is that right, Jeff? It says 95 meters high?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Wow. So therefore it's twice the height. Yeah.
Holy cow, that's big. Wow. Can I move on to something? We were talking earlier about Romania, and this sort of brings it full cycle. When you were talking about Tesla being a Tartarian, and this is like way back when. And I was, one of my heroes in physics is Roger Boscovich, who was also from the same era. I'm just wondering, what did you mean by Tartarian? Are they like a special race that is he noble in some way, or just happens to be part of that group? Or
I think Tesla just embodied again it was an archetype who embodied the last in the lineage of the grand Tartarians that were being exterminated, and certainly we've been trying to
exterminated by whom and when?
Well, if we're going to get into that, it would be we're going to tiptoe into more modern history, which is very unpopular, and that keys us into the Israel and the Khazarian Mafia.
Okay.
Crypto.
I kind of thought maybe you were going there.
My wife is part Tartar, by the way.
So then the Khazarians
Khazarians are coming after her then.
So the modern day Romanians are not of the same lineage as Nikola Tesla was? Is that what you're
Yeah,
saying?
they may well be, but I'm saying the Khazarians are the antithesis to the Tartarians in that sense. So Cain, Abel, Tatar, Khazar, Enki, Enlil, it all plays back into the same dialectic.
I've read quite a bit of Russian literature, and in the Russian mind, the Tartars were kind of thought of as sort of, low class. They were the the nomads.
No, Greg, this is not true. I know all about Lithuania. They were married.
You're talking about his wife now.
The kings were given their best women to these people. These were the elite warriors that coming into Lithuania, Russia. They were the highest elite warriors. They were given homes, towns, everything, the highest regard. So they had
By Russians?
Russians, Lithuanians,
Everybody
Estonians,
got
Romanians,
Interesting.
Belarus, all of this. They were given the highest regard. I don't remember what it was. Maybe you know, Sasha. It was 700 years ago, 1,000 years ago, a long time ago. But we have it, in her, her genealogy and her father's side. I mean, they look, if you just pull up, pictures of Tartars, they look like that. My wife doesn't because mom's blonde hair, blue eyes, so it kind of mixed. But yes,
I had
they
in
were.
my head
They
that
were
the
elites.
Tartars were related to the whole hordes of Genghis Khan. Is that not true?
That's the Khazars.
That's okay. So you're saying the Khazars are from Genghis Khan? That's where
in the simplest possible terms, the
Khazars
Khazars
were
are the bad
prior.
guys. Khazars are the bad guys. Tartars are the good guys. In that silly dialectic,
Yes.
of course, there's a lot of gray area. But the Khazarian Mafia, which is best exemplified by the wage enslaving Khazarian Mafia, who the crypto Jewish lot, Sabbateans that infiltrated the great Jewish faith and weaponized it as good, honest, true Jews in Israel have been lobbying and protesting for decades against the takeover of their territory by crypto Jews. It's not coming from me, but the Hollywood machine, academia, global finances, and the priest banker class of subhuman Draco is largely the crypto Jewish Khazarian Mafia, masquerading as being the Bush family or the Crown of England or the Bill Gates clans and the Faucis. So it's a really interesting story. And yes, genealogy is absolutely the basis of it, which is also to do with why bad chemistry and synthetic molecules in the Public Health Administration have been the big drive in recent years, in the last 100 years, really since the Spanish flu in the First World War, all the way through.
All right, I'm fascinated with Khazarian.
I really want to
Mafia.
move in that direction, but go ahead.
Yeah, I do too. That's what I want to do. You say you do, Greg?
Yes.
Yeah, I do too. I want to zoom back in on this. All right. So I've been following it, and I hear a lot of people speak about it as though I should know who they're speaking of. So I did as best I can looking into what is exactly the Khazarian Mafia. I know who the Khazars were. How does that line up?
I'm so sorry to do this, but can you give me the critical question here?
Yes. Where did the Khazarian Mafia come from? What were their origins? And what are they doing today?
If you'll allow me to, I would be really happy to, again, just share my screen. Can I do that?
Please. Of course. Yeah. Go ahead.
So this should, if I've got it in here, I should have it in here. Okay. Gonna give you a little bit of a history lesson.
Yes, thank you. I appreciate
might-
it.
Let's have some.
I really- I
Get
don't
the
know anything
video
about-
in trouble, just saying.
Let's have some
I
fun.
think, yeah, that's good.
All right. Look, I'm just gonna.
Oh, a
I'm gonna
PowerPoint. Good. I like
jump into
PowerPoint.
here. So, okay. I'm just gonna rush through this. Okay. So we get.
The place inside the jar, and the lid is then sealed. They are left undisturbed for 3 days. Then, when the jar is opened, the fleas will not jump out. In fact, the fleas will never jump higher than the level set by the lid. Their behavior is now set for the rest of their lives. And when these fleas reproduce, their offspring will automatically follow their example.
So you see, that's how it happens. And
That makes sense. I
let's see if
understand
I
it. That's
can get-
good.
I'm trying to find my way. These are some of my own scrapbook images of me and my insane journeys over the years.
Nice.
But that's the Empress of China. You didn't know she existed. You know, that was fairly recently in my office in Bucharest. Very real stuff that the world never knows anything about. And the man next to her is the great famed prosecutor, wonderful man who eliminated the hardcore Cosa Nostra mafia from Italy. In any event, as the King of Kings on the right, true King of Morocco on the left, lower left, me in Iran 25 years ago, me with the King of Kings in Southeast Asia. You know, so it goes on. Imperial Meiji Imperial Princess Kara Nakamura of Japan. You know, this is 20 years ago in my home in Bali. This is just stuff, white hats, and I just show a number of these images. I'm trying to get to, here we go. I'm trying to get to Burning Man, Manhattan, Chartres Cathedral, 13th century, which is a Schumann resonator labyrinth coil on the floor that was built almost 1,000 years ago. All cathedrals are resonance capacitors and predate what we think. This is the electric universe here talking about. Burning Man is a mass satanic ritual. All cities have been laid out as resonance capacitors. Ancient temples, Parthenon, Edfu, Mecca in Medina, you know, all cathedrals, cross sections are capacitive, charge. This is all about plasma harvest, about life force harvest. But it's not bad. These technologies can be used for good or for ill. They were used for good. They were harmonizing, and we were living for thousands of years in the ancient times. And many of these edifices survived from the ancient times. This I speak about because no one knows that in the late 1800s, all of our buses and taxis were running around in Tokyo, in Beijing, in London, in Vienna, in Prague, in Chicago, in Philadelphia, in New York, were electric buses and cars everywhere. We had charging stations everywhere. And that's a fact. We had electric hovering trolleys on magnetic hovering technologies. We're moving around the streets. Solar powered electric car. Look at this one here on the right. This is just one model.
But one old car that certainly defies the general description is the 1912 Baker, because this model was an electric brawn and noiseless.
Noiseless.
However, we are not so much concerned with the merits of the veteran car as with, on this occasion, its source of power, the sun. For this is the world's first solar car, powered by a 10,000 cell panel on the roof, brought over from the United States by scientist and pioneer in this sphere, Dr. Charles.
There's British Empire for you. This is just my days at the United Nations when I was a Director General, and I explained on my lecture tour why I was hacking in, what we were trying to do, myself and Dr. David Martin there, trying to bring about a quantum revolution with technologies. So again, when I talk about these subjects, I have a certain level of expertise, even at a diplomatic level, communicating with heads of state and with energy ministers and finance ministers and so on. It's my diplomatic pedigree. It's you know, the Tesla thing is a really important subject. The world fairs, fires, floods, and other out-of-place artifacts. You know, we're told that these amazing places were built to house the world fairs for a few weeks, and then they were pulled down again. No, these were the edifices that pre-existed and had been there for thousands, in some case, thousands of years, certainly many centuries in our cityscape. And under the guise of world fairs, there was a destruction complex and they were destroyed. And the entire cityscape was changed in the last 100, 130 years by these great fairs. But it was just rewriting history. So this is well known, well attested, forensically evidenced, but we still don't want to look at it because we're addicted to our psycho-intellectual fear complex. And we haven't dropped our testicles as a species. The world was very different 130 years ago, 150 years ago, 200 years ago, moving sidewalks at the Paris exhibition in 1900. Go figure. These are edifices. I mean, this is a great example. 1900, that was what it looked like in Paris on the River Seine, and that's 2017. Every single thing that was an ancient Tartarian golden age technology, dielectric antenna that was harmonizing, healing, and eliciting cold electricity to power up cities with luminescence, that was happening 150, 200 years ago and beyond. We just don't know about it. So the desecration of art, beauty, and consciousness has been the preserve of the Khazarians. That's what they do. The Tartarians elevate consciousness and affirm art and beauty and life and liberty. So the war that we're going through has ever been between Enlil and Enki, Cain and Abel, good and evil, Tartaria, Khazaria. That's the real history we need to be learning and looking at. And the fall of the Golden Age, all of this gone, devastated, destroyed. Some of it resurfacing in archaeological digs now. Amazing things surfacing. You look at St. Basil's Cathedral in Russia, in Moscow. I've been there multiple times over the last 25 years. You think that this is the building? This is the tip of the building. This is the top of the building. This is classic mud flood history erasure taking place. When Sachi and Sachi were commissioned to build out what it really would look like underground when they actually dig it out, this is what they reckoned at. That begins to explain and approach how ancient Khazaria tiptoed in to thwart completely our golden age and superimpose a transhumanist agenda, an artificial AI-controlled agenda, which is a demonic, satanic, Saturnian, Luciferian agenda. And that's the real battle that's taking place. That's why the Khazarians infiltrated the British Crown. That's why they infiltrated the Vatican. That's why they infiltrated Judaism. That's why they infiltrated Islam. That's why they infiltrated Washington, D.C. and Rome and orchestrated these Napoleonic wars, First and Second World War, and every other goddamn war that's happened in the last few hundred years. Complete takedown of the golden age. All the great fires, they did not happen because of burning bits of toast in a baker's oven, as we're told. This was all orchestrated, deconstruction of history and reconstruction by these forces operating over humanity. This is, again, forensically evidenced and well attested. And it's all about the Tartars versus the Khazars, Cain and Abel.
All right, I'm depressed. Thank you.